This video is audio content only. Tonight, we open the door to a collection of tales where the ordinary twists into the terrifying. From unexplained phenomena in quiet homes to encounters on desolate roads, these are stories of the supernatural that defy logic. Prepare to question the boundaries of your reality as we delve into experiences that linger, unsettling, and profound. Listen closely, for some truths are best heard in the dark. Chapter 1: The House Under Siege. When I was still living at home, I often experienced sleep paralysis and strange phenomena. One day, I was reading a book in bed when suddenly I felt myself being pulled. I fell out of bed and was dragged across the floor towards the door. Terrified, I looked down at my feet and saw a pale, slender arm reaching out from under the door, and it was gripping my ankle tightly. Realizing I was in serious trouble, I recited every prayer I knew and called out to my great-grandma Rose for help. But the grip on my foot didn't loosen. It kept pulling me, and I remember the doorframe pressing against the sole of my foot. When I finally came to, the arm was gone. It was still dark outside, so I tried to go back to sleep. Just as I was drifting off again, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the entire house, coming from my younger sister, Emily's room. Could it be that arm? The thought flashed through my mind, and I started to panic in my bed. Soon after, I heard my father rush into her room, exclaiming, "What on earth?" When Dad called for me, I went in to find Emily sobbing in her bed. One of her legs was swollen to about 3 times its normal size. She was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, and the diagnosis was a complex fracture. Her leg bones had been crushed while she was lying in bed. Emily told our dad that a woman had grabbed her leg with incredible force. Hearing that, I gasped and looked down at my own feet. There were no distinct handprints on my ankles, but I had blisters about 4 inches wide, and Emily had the same marks on her leg. Emily was discharged from the hospital after about 3 months, but that was just the beginning of our troubles. She was a freshman in high school at the time, and she started causing problems at school repeatedly. It was the same at home. She was terrified of something and kept harming herself. Desperate, our family took her to a mental health clinic, but her condition only worsened. Around that time, a series of fires plagued our neighborhood. Emily broke her leg on May 22nd. The first fire was on June 22nd, then August 22nd, October, December, and February. The causes of the fires varied, but when we looked at them on a map, they formed a triangle. They seemed to be encircling a single house. After the third fire, people started whispering that it couldn't be a coincidence. After the February fire, the neighborhood association arranged for an exorcism. My sister and I were made to sit in the front row during the exorcism. I was on edge, worried Emily might act out, but the ritual itself ended quickly and without incident. What was revealed afterward, however, was quite shocking. Over 40 years ago, a man committed a terrible crime in a nearby town. He was a serial killer, using a knife to repeatedly stab women, then burying their bodies in the mountains. The killer was never executed, but his family home still stands. That was the house at the center of the fires. The psychic explained that even though the killer wasn't executed, his malice remained, leading to these events. Then the discussion turned to us. Apparently, the knife the killer used had been taken from our house. My grandfather looked ashen, as if he knew something about it. The psychic told him that because a companion blade to the one used in the crimes was still in our possession, he needed to get rid of it. My grandfather immediately went home, retrieved a knife, and entrusted it to the psychic. The psychic then told us, "You two sisters will continue to see things." She said, "The older sister will be fine. For the younger sister, I was worried about her initial condition, but I've placed a charm on her, so she'll be okay." What she meant by placed a charm wasn't entirely clear, but since then, Emily has stopped harming herself and lives peacefully. As for me, I still see things sometimes, but I haven't experienced any harm. Chapter 2: Harassing Calls. A call came from an unknown number, and a woman's voice asked, "Is this?" But my name is Miller, so I replied, "No, that's not me." Then she said, "Then who are you?" I was surprised and a little annoyed, so I said, "I'm not telling you who I am, and isn't it rude to just ask that out of nowhere?" The call disconnected. I wondered what that was all about. A few minutes later, another call came from an unknown number. I answered, and it was the same woman again, asking, "Is this?" I just said, "No, it's not," and hung up. Then I blocked the number. About a week later, another call came from a different unknown number. Thinking, there's been a lot of weird stuff lately, I answered without saying anything. A voice said, "Oh, hello, this is Miss Anderson, isn't it?" She sounded strangely pleased. It was already creepy, so I just hung up without a word. Then it rang again. I was surprised, but I was fed up, so I answered, intending to tell her off. "It is Miss Anderson, isn't it?" The voice was strangely pleased again. I said angrily, "Please check who you're calling. I've told you multiple times it's not me. This is harassment." Then the woman, in a low, masculine voice, said, "It's coming from you, isn't it?" and the call disconnected. The voice was incredibly powerful, and for a while after that, every time the phone rang, I jumped. Chapter 3: The Woman on the Mountain Pass. This happened to Tim, who became a truck driver 7 years ago after the company he worked for went bankrupt, leaving him struggling to find a job. Initially, Tim drove a small 2-ton truck, but after about a year as a driver, he moved up to a 4-ton rig, extending his routes not just within the state, but across state lines. About 5 years ago, late one night, Tim was driving his truck back from a neighboring state, heading down a mountain pass road near the state border. He felt the urge to relieve himself and pulled over into a wide spot just before the summit. It was only a light drizzle, but the fog was thick, and the usually quiet mountain road felt unusually eerie tonight. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, he felt a sense of relief after taking care of business. As he turned to get back into his truck, he noticed someone standing on the passenger side, and his body tensed instantly. Someone out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour? Tim cautiously observed. The figure turned. It was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with shoulder-length hair. She wore what looked like a company uniform, and everything about her was soaked from the rain. Tim was about to speak when the woman uttered a request. "Could you give me a ride down the mountain to Pine Ridge?" Her voice was small and frail, yet perfectly clear. For a moment, Tim's mind flashed through all the ghost stories he'd ever heard, but the woman's incredibly sad and lonely expression outweighed his fear. "Sure, hop in," Tim said, opening the passenger door and gesturing for her to get in. As she stepped up and grasped the handle to climb into the truck, Tim happened to glance at her feet and felt a familiar chill. He had set up the truck so the interior light would come on whenever the passenger or driver's door opened. Light always casts a shadow, but she had none. Yet, strangely, he felt no fear. As she settled into the passenger seat, Tim quietly closed the door, got into the driver's seat, and started driving. As he drove, he occasionally glanced at her profile. Her face remained as sad and lonely as before, and she sat silently, gazing downwards. Unable to bear the silence, Tim began to speak to her, almost as if to himself. "Have you been through a lot of sadness, a lot of hardship? I don't know what happened to you, but you shouldn't be out here like this. Don't you have somewhere you need to go? Maybe there's nothing I can do for you, but..." She offered no reaction to Tim's words. It would take another 20 minutes to get down the mountain pass to where she wanted to go. During that time, Tim continued his one-sided conversation, undeterred. "Is there something for you in Pine Ridge? What will you do once you get there? Will you just come back to this mountain pass? I don't think you should keep repeating things. You need to move on." She remained silent, still looking down. Not even knowing if she was listening, Tim kept talking until they finally descended the mountain. Suddenly, she pointed ahead and simply said, "There." It was a nondescript intersection leading into a residential neighborhood. Tim put on his hazard lights and pulled the truck over, then looked at her. "Thank you," a faint voice whispered, and then she vanished, leaving only the sound behind. Then another word, "I'm going," seemed to come from nowhere. Tim let out a sigh of relief, started the truck again, and drove safely back to the company depot. Sometime later, Tim heard about an incident that had occurred on that mountain pass from a colleague. 10 years prior, a 22-year-old woman had been murdered in a personal entanglement, and her body dumped there. The residential neighborhood where Tim had dropped her off was apparently the very town where she had lived. After that, Tim never saw her on the mountain pass again. 3 years ago, he had a child and was living happily. His daughter was a bright, energetic girl, free from any major illnesses or injuries. Tim adored her, and his daughter doted on her father. Then, this year, having all but forgotten the woman on the mountain pass, Tim encountered her again. It was mid-September. Tim woke up in the middle of the night, feeling thirsty. He went to the kitchen for a drink of water, and it was when he returned to the bedroom that it happened. His beloved daughter, sleeping beside his wife, had kicked off her covers and was sprawled out. Chuckling at her messy sleeping habits, he gently tucked her back into bed. At that moment, still asleep, his daughter gripped Tim's hand. "Thank you," she said. "Because you helped me that night, I am alive now. Thank you, truly." It was her voice. Whether she was reborn as his daughter or simply speaking through her, Tim couldn't tell. But despite the terror, it was an experience that left him with a strange warmth. "My family and I have been living peacefully ever since, without any further misfortune." Chapter 4: The Phantom Elevator. Just last week, on my way home from a friend's place, I had a strange encounter with an elevator. I pushed the button next to the door, and the doors immediately slid open. But the elevator car wasn't there. For a second, I was startled, but it wasn't a strong feeling at the time. I just thought, well, that's unusual. My only thought was, that's dangerous. And while it was certainly dangerous, I figured it wasn't something you see every day, so I took a few steps back and peered into the empty shaft. Of course, there were no lights inside the shaft, and it was mostly pitch black and hard to see. But with the light from the apartment hallway, I could make out thick cables and pipes. So I just stood there, staring. Then, as I squinted, trying to see deeper, suddenly, the elevator car plummeted down from above at an incredible speed. There wasn't a sound, nothing at all, so I couldn't react in time. It brushed past me by mere inches, dropping from above with terrifying speed. That's when I completely freaked out. I immediately tried to rush back to my friend's apartment. But then I heard a sound from behind me. I turned around, drawn by the noise. And as if nothing had happened, the elevator doors were just opening. There hadn't been enough time for the doors to close after I turned around, and there was no sense that they had closed at all. I was completely bewildered. It felt like I'd seen a waking dream or been tricked by some phantom. After waiting for a bit, the elevator doors closed as if nothing had happened. In the end, I didn't go back to my friend's place, and I didn't use the elevator. I just took the stairs all the way home. I still get chills down my spine thinking about what would have happened if I'd leaned in to look down the shaft out of curiosity. I've been debating whether I should contact the building management or the elevator company, but I probably wouldn't be able to explain it properly. So I've decided to just pretend I didn't see anything. Chapter 5: The Curse of Blackwood Falls. This happened last month. I have a classmate, Sam, who suddenly came up to me and asked, "Hey, you know anything about psychics?" "Whoa, out of nowhere," I said, raising an eyebrow. He then started to tell me his story with a solemn expression. Apparently, over winter break, some older kids had dragged him along to Blackwood Falls. Blackwood Falls is a pretty infamous haunted spot in our home state of Vermont, and it has a legend that goes like this. A long time ago, there was an old woman who absolutely doted on her grandchild. One day, as she was working in the garden with her grandchild nearby, she accidentally plunged the sickle she was holding into the child's neck, killing them. Overcome with guilt and grief for having killed her beloved grandchild, the old woman went to Blackwood Falls, a local sacred site, and hung herself, ending her own life. Ever since, it's said that anyone who visits the spot just for kicks will be afflicted by the old woman's curse. "I took a picture there," Sam said, opening his phone and thrusting the screen at me. "See, top right, above my head? It's right there, plain as day." The photo on his phone showed Sam, dimly lit in the pitch black, and exactly where he pointed, above his head, was the face of an old woman, clearly visible, sticking out her tongue as if making a taunting face. Ever since that night, I've been getting sleep paralysis every night, and my heart suddenly starts aching, he told me. My mom even said, "Didn't you help someone recently? That kid on the right, she's really something. You haven't been doing any weird drugs, have you? I'm scared out of my mind, man." He'd tried to talk to his parents about it, but they apparently hadn't taken him very seriously. Seeing Sam so utterly dejected, I wanted to help him somehow, but I didn't know any psychics, and there was nothing I could do. Over the next few days, Sam visibly wasted away. It was painful to watch. Then, Last week, during lunch break at school, Sam collapsed, clutching his chest. He was rushed to the hospital by ambulance that day, but the doctors apparently found nothing wrong with him. Realizing something truly strange was going on, his parents took him to a church up in the mountains yesterday. Sam said the reverend at that church told him this: "About 5 or 6 people like you visit this place every year. That place, you see, is where a terrible fiend resides. Someone who, out of spite for a wife he couldn't stand, murdered his own innocent grandchild. Let this be a lesson to you. Never go near that place again." According to the Reverend, that was the true story behind Blackwood Falls. Sam is apparently going back to that church next week for an exorcism. Chapter 6. The Man Behind Me. I was walking home one night down a dark street, and I noticed a guy following me. I didn't really pay him much mind. Suddenly, a guy on a bike came up from behind. He told me to hop on the back, and when I asked why, because I thought it was pretty suspicious, he said, "The guy behind you has a knife. You're in danger." While we were having that exchange, the man just calmly walked past us. At the time, nothing came of it, but a few days later, my apartment was broken into, and my room was trashed. Thanks to eyewitness accounts from the neighbors, the culprit was caught quickly. It was the guy from the apartment next door. He was a college student. He said he couldn't stand the noise coming from my apartment and had tried to kill me. Apparently, he was also the man following me that night. That's what I was told during several rounds of questioning. But that apartment belongs to my parents, and I only use it as a studio. No one is usually there. At least, it shouldn't be making enough noise to drive a permanent resident like the guy next door to such a frenzy. It was a truly baffling incident. Chapter 7. The Twisted Building. This happened about 30 years ago when I was in 8th grade. It was a Sunday, and 3 of us, my good friends Alex, Ben, and I, had decided to go see a movie. My town was small, so going to the city where the movie theater was felt like a huge event for us country kids. On Saturday night, I was buzzing with excitement at home when Ben called. "Sorry," he said, "I completely forgot. I have violin lessons tomorrow. They end right around the time the movie finishes, so let's meet at the Metroville train station entrance." Ben was pretty well off, which is why he took violin lessons. I was a little disappointed because I'd been looking forward to all 3 of us having fun and seeing a movie in the big city. But I cheered myself up, thinking we could just hang out together after the movie. With that, I went to bed. So, the next day, Alex and I went to the movie by ourselves. After the film, we were walking towards the station, chatting about how good it was, when Alex said, "Hey, if we go up to the 3rd floor of this building, there's a sky bridge that leads straight to the station." It was a big city, and pedestrian bridges extended from the station plaza to various department stores, about 3 stories up. I thought it would be better than navigating the crowds on the street below, so we entered the building next to the movie theater. It was a commercial building packed with small shops and boutiques. We found the stairs and started climbing from the first floor. When we reached the third floor, there was no door leading into the shops. I figured it must be a storage area or something, and that the public wasn't allowed in from this stairwell. Maybe we should just go back down to the first floor and walk normally, I suggested. But Alex said, "No, let's try going up. Maybe we can get into the shops from the fourth floor, then take a different staircase down to the third." However, when we reached the fourth floor, there was no door there either. We continued up to the fifth floor. Still no door. We were getting a little annoyed now, but we kept climbing higher and higher. Had we reached the 10th floor? I noticed something strange. When I'd looked at the building from the outside, I didn't think it had 10 stories. But Alex was still pumped, saying, "Let's go higher," and pushing onward. We kept climbing the stairs. By the time we reached around the 20th floor, I knew something was seriously wrong. The stairwell itself looked strangely old and felt damp and musty. It felt like one of those creepy, moss-covered stairwells from a horror video game, like Resident Evil. I was getting seriously freaked out at this point, so I turned to Alex and said, "Hey, let's turn back. This is definitely weird." Alex, who was still ahead of me, just said, his back still to me, "Huh? Weird, huh?" "What are you messing around for?" I said, a little irritated. "What's so funny? I said, let's go back." I raised my voice slightly. Then Alex said again, "Ha ha ha, weird, huh?" I was even more annoyed by his words. But then I noticed something strange about the way Alex was climbing the stairs. His shape and form were definitely Alex, but his movements were all wrong. He was certainly climbing, but it was a jerky, unnatural motion, like a puppet being clumsily manipulated by invisible strings. His right hand, left hand, right foot, left foot, each seemed to be moving independently. It was just plain weird. My feet froze, rooted to the spot. Then Alex stopped too, and slowly turned to face me. "Weird, huh? Ha ha ha," he laughed. When I saw Alex's face, I screamed. Just like his movements, his facial expression was a stiff, unnatural laugh. But most terrifying of all, his eyes were entirely black, the whites completely gone, just two dark, staring orbs that made me scream. I turned on my heel and bolted down the stairs at full speed. My feet tangled, and I nearly fell, but I ran blindly, fueled by pure terror. When I finally came to, I was standing in a drugstore on the first floor of the commercial building. I have no memory of how I got out of the stairwell, but in my panic, I didn't look back. I just ran all the way to the station. When I reached the station entrance, Ben was waiting. "You're late," he grumbled. "It's been an hour since the movie ended." Then he noticed Alex wasn't with me and asked, "What happened to Alex?" I was still gripped by the fear that Alex, moving in that strange, jerky way, would come chasing after me if I stayed outside. So I quickly pulled Ben along, and we went into a fast food place inside the station. I told Ben everything that had happened. I wasn't able to explain it very well, so Ben kept telling me, "No, tell me again, in more detail." At first, Ben seemed to think I was just messing with him, but gradually, his expression grew serious. That's because Ben was a bit sensitive to the supernatural, and he seemed to have a gut feeling that what had happened to us wasn't normal. "Let's go back to that building, just in case," Ben said. I said no, but when he added, "We can't just leave Alex like that, can we?" I realized he was right. Alex might have been possessed by something. So we went back to the building. Just as before, we went up the stairs, but this time, on the third floor, there was a door leading to the CD store and the sky bridge. When we went up to the fourth floor, it was an arcade, and we could enter normally. The stairs ended there. It was a 4-story building. We just shook our heads, but for that day, we decided to go home. We thought maybe Alex would be back at school normally tomorrow. The next day, when I got to school, Alex wasn't there. Ben, who arrived about 10 minutes after me, looked pale and said he'd had a strange dream that morning. In the dream, Alex was walking barefoot through the woods, crying and muttering, "This is unfair. This is unfair." Ben said that wasn't just a dream, it was real. But he also said, "I don't know what to do." Several days passed, and Alex still didn't return. A missing person report was filed. Ben and I even went to the police station to answer questions about that day, but we didn't mention the strange things that had happened. It was about a month later, I think, when Alex was found. His body. I didn't hear this directly from his family, but apparently he was found completely dried out, like a mummy, next to the grounds of a small chapel in the mountains of a neighboring state over 60 miles away from my town, and it seemed he had been dead for over a month. At the time, Alex's death was an incredibly disturbing experience, but as the days passed, I gradually forgot about it. This memory came back to me recently when I met Ben for the first time in years, and we started talking about what was that all about. I haven't been to that movie theater since, but I'm thinking of going again soon. The shock of my friend's death, combined with the fact that it was around the time I needed to start focusing on college applications, was a blessing in disguise. I told myself I had to concentrate on my studies and tried hard to forget. And honestly, more than anything, I really hated that building and wanted to forget it. So my memory is a little hazy, but I clearly remember Alex acting strangely. The way Alex died is just something I heard from others, so I don't know if it's entirely true, but it seems certain that he was found in that neighboring state. I also avoided asking people for details because I didn't want to know more. When I met Ben recently, he said, "Oh, I still remember that dream clearly." The reason I thought about going to that movie theater again is because I'm in New York now, and apparently that old town has changed a lot. I was just idly wondering how much it's changed. Next time I visit home, I might just drive past the movie theater. That's all. Chapter 8. The Targeted Family. I still find this hard to believe, but it actually happened to me, so I have to write it down. I grew up in a quiet corner of the country, but even before I can remember, we were constantly moving from place to place. It wasn't because we were being chased by dead collectors or anything like that, but my parents were always relocating, day and night, as if they were running from something. I remember from a young age that no matter where we went, they'd consult psychics and spiritualists, and each time they'd just shake their heads. The frequent moves finally stopped when I was old enough to work, and my mother fell ill. My father's resolve was firm. He would say things like, "We can't move anymore. I can't let them take your mother." When I was little, I often asked why we moved so much, but whenever the topic came up, my parents would fall silent. If I pressed them, my usually gentle father would fly into a rage, so I stopped asking. After my mother fell ill, I didn't need to ask. I understood. I think it was about 6 months after we settled in one spot. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I started hearing a sound, like heavy chains dragging, coming from somewhere. And it wasn't just one set of chains. There were many. When I told my father it was getting closer every day, he just looked at me, his face grim. "It's okay if only you escape," he said. Our family had never stayed in one place, so there was nowhere for us to run to separately. I decided that no matter what, I would stay with my father. Around that time, my mother, who was said to be too agitated, was moved from the regular ward to a specialized unit for severe cases. My father also grew visibly thinner, often spending his days with his eyes wide and frantic, as if constantly terrified of something. Then, one morning, the sound was louder than ever. My father suddenly yelled, "Run! Get out!" and shook me awake, pushing me out of the house. I was stunned, not understanding what was happening, when I heard the sound, amplified, coming from inside the house. It felt like an army of armored figures was stomping through the house, packed tightly together. The metallic tang of blood also wafted from inside. Driven by my father's desperate plea to run and that terrifying sound, I found myself on the first commuter train, and then somehow on the fourth floor of a downtown building, still in my pajamas and sandals. Unable to do anything, shivering from the cold, I entered a store that had its lights on. Of course, I didn't have my wallet, so I just stood there. As the sun began to rise, the clerk, perhaps finding me suspicious, approached me. Seeing that I couldn't say anything, the clerk, a young person whose gender was hard to tell, gently offered me a warm drink and tried to reason with me. They kindly said their shift would end soon and they could take me to the police afterward, but I refused. There was no point in going to the police. At that moment, I heard the sound again. I tried to run, but the clerk grabbed my arm. Surprised, I looked at their face and saw that they too looked startled, staring at me. It seemed the clerk could hear the same sound I was hearing. Nothing like that had ever happened before, so despite the terror, and perhaps inappropriately, I felt a slight surge of relief. Still, I didn't want to cause the clerk any more trouble, so I tried to explain briefly and leave. But the clerk insisted, saying they knew someone who might be able to help. Looking back, there was no guarantee they weren't a danger, but at the time, the warmth of the drink and the reassurance that they also heard the sound made me incapable of thinking clearly. Trusting that reassurance turned out to be my salvation. The person they introduced me to looked a little younger than the clerk, but they were calmer. As soon as they saw me, they smiled gently and said, "You've been through so much, haven't you?" At that, tears immediately welled up. Crying, I told them everything that had happened. The young man nodded silently and gave various instructions to the clerk. I don't remember much, but I heard words like ritual, water, and moon. The clerk, though clearly confused, followed the young man's instructions, and perhaps to comfort me as I cried, they even sang a cheerful song. Before I knew it, the young man's ritual was complete. I was just crying there, so I didn't understand what they had done, but I distinctly remember a powerful stench of blood and the terrifying clang of armor right before it ended. As soon as it was over, I called home, but the line was dead. The clerk, Casey, even took the day off from work to come home with me. My father wasn't in the house. Instead, the house was filled with strange, crude footprints, like something ancient had walked through, leaving no clear path. There was barely a clean spot to stand. Casey supported me, trembling, as they searched the entire house, but my father was nowhere to be found. We could still smell the faint metallic tang of blood. Since then, I haven't heard that sound or smelled the blood. My father still hasn't been found, but he seems to have calmed down. He'll be moved to a regular ward soon, and if all goes well, he might even be home for the holidays. Once my mother is discharged, I want to thank Casey and the young man. I still don't know the cause of those sounds or the smell of blood. Once things settle down, I plan to ask again. Chapter 9. Footsteps in the Hotel. This happened about 5 years ago. My company is in food manufacturing, and a few times a year I'm sent on business trips for about a week to exhibit at department store events in other states. This particular time, I was participating in a special event at a department store right next to the train station in Chicago, and the organizers had booked me a room at a hotel. I'm the type who has trouble sleeping when my environment changes, and even though I was exhausted that day, I couldn't fall asleep. I kept shifting restlessly in bed, trying desperately to get some sleep. That's when I heard footsteps. At first, I thought I was imagining things. It sounded like someone was quietly pacing back and forth in the small room that housed the bathroom, even though no one should have been in there. I tried to tell myself it was just noise bleeding through from the next room, but I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling. Trembling, I crept closer to check. I stood in the dark in front of the door, but I could still sense a presence there. I didn't have the courage to open the door, so I flipped on the light switch. If nothing appeared in the small window in the middle of the door, I figured everything would be fine. But someone was there. The instant the light came on, a dark shape loomed in the window, and the door was pounded from the inside with incredible force. Terrified, I bolted from the room. Still in my pajamas, I didn't even dare wait for the elevator and ran down the emergency stairs all the way to the first floor. After that, because I'd left my key in the room, I couldn't bring myself to go back. I grabbed a hotel employee and somehow convinced them to come back to the room with me. No one was in the room. However, the bathroom door was wide open, and only that area was soaking wet. I stayed in that room for the next few days as planned, but nothing else happened. Maybe it was because I was too scared to close the bathroom door and I left the light on. To this day, I still don't know what that was. Chapter 10. The Village Without Suns. I'm a college student living in New York, and a friend of mine came from a rural town. I heard a story from him about that place. It was a coastal town, and he mentioned that the birth rate for girls was unusually high there. I wasn't surprised by that, as I'd heard of towns where twins were common, but the reality was different. It turned out that if a boy was born, there was a high chance he'd be deformed. They'd be physically abnormal or suffer from various illnesses. Now, with advances in medical technology, those occurrences have drastically decreased. But back then, it was apparently horrific. For a time, there were no men left in the town. If a male traveler happened to wander in, it was a one-night paradise for him. They'd get the man drunk, and several young women from the town would try to conceive children with him. After that, the man was no longer needed. They'd kill him while he was drunk and sleeping, and then dump his body in the ocean. Any deformed children born were also killed and thrown into the sea. Then, from a certain day onward, strange creatures began to emerge from the ocean. These creatures were like fish with human limbs, a kind of fish humanoid. They would reportedly crawl out of the ocean in the dead of night and attack anyone in the town who was outside their house. "Have you ever seen one?" I asked. "No, I haven't," he replied, "but they're definitely real." "You sound so sure," I said. "Do you have any proof?" "They never offered any proper burial rites for the deformed children they killed," he explained. "First, the travelers were murdered, and if their children were born deformed, they were killed too. If there's no peace for the dead, how could their vengeful spirits ever rest?" he said. He'd never seen them, but as he spoke, he kept laughing, as if trying to hide something. "My guess is that even if the chances of deformed children being born have decreased, it still happens. He might have witnessed a deformed child being killed and thrown away." He also mentioned that he was strictly told never to go outside after 10 p.m. By the way, I mentioned he came from that rural town, but to be precise, his entire family fled from it when he was in upper elementary school. If I really tried, I could probably figure out where that town is, but I have no desire to go verify any of it. I enjoy a good ghost story, but I certainly don't want to experience one myself. So, while I have no way to confirm it, I have a feeling those things are still there. At the end of his story, he said, "The creatures must have eaten the flesh of the deformed children and the travelers." That line was strangely terrifying. He had seen them. He truly had. Chapter 11. The Embrace. My maternal grandmother, Martha, used to be a midwife. This was a long time ago, about 50 years back, I suppose. She often told me when I was little that any child, when they're small, is like an angel, just adorable. She'd talk about how much she loved her work, the joy of it. She'd say, "Always have clean sheets and blankets ready." She'd describe the incredible emotion when a baby was born, the mother crying tears of happiness. She felt truly blessed to be present at such moments. Of course, she was telling this to a young child, so my grandmother only shared the bright, amusing parts of her work as a midwife. Martha passed away a year and a half ago. Recently, my mother, who can now talk about Grandma Martha with a smile, and I were reminiscing. I said, "You know, Grandma used to tell me so many stories about being a midwife." That's when my mother told me about the darker side of the job. I want to share that story with you. This is a story my mother heard directly from Grandma Martha about 10 years ago. One day, Grandma Martha had been at an expectant mother's house since morning, helping with the delivery. The woman was about to give birth. But she had a severe cold, and everyone around her was very worried. Besides Grandma, another midwife, Susan, who was 35 at the time, was also there to help. Susan was a kind person, saying, "My house is close by, and it's always good to have an extra pair of hands, isn't it?" Grandma Martha had worked with Susan several times before, so she felt a strong sense of reassurance. The expectant mother's family and neighbors waited anxiously, but noon passed, then night, and still the baby wasn't born. So everyone decided to try and calm down. Grandma Martha and Susan consulted each other. "We midwives will stay close by tonight and take turns sleeping," they told the family. "Leave it to us." The expectant mother's mother apparently said, "I want to stay by her side too," but Grandma Martha and Susan replied, "You must be exhausted. Besides, we'll wake you immediately when the time comes." And with that, they got her agreement. They took turns in 3-hour shifts. Grandma Martha took over from Susan. Then, after 2 hours, Grandma woke Susan up for her turn. And after another 2 hours, this cycle repeated several times. Grandma Martha had been worried the expectant mother's fever might rise during the night, but it didn't get as high as she feared. She prayed that they would get through this safely. Grandma Martha was awakened by the expectant mother's painful cries of labor. She looked over and saw Susan already deeply engrossed in assisting with the delivery. Grandma Martha felt a vague sense of unease, but she quickly got up to help with the birth. Hearing the commotion, the expectant mother's mother rushed in before anyone could wake her. In that community, in that town, there was an unspoken understanding that no family member other than the mother of the woman in labor should enter the delivery room. The other family members waited anxiously in another room while the expectant mother's mother held her daughter's hand. Then Susan delivered the baby. Somehow, it was born safely. The expectant mother was also fully conscious. As her mother and Grandma Martha breathed a sigh of relief, Susan spoke. "This child, it has no eyeballs." Grandma Martha said she distinctly remembered seeing the baby's head when it was halfway out of the mother. Midwives always check the baby's face and the number of fingers and toes right after birth. This time, it was Susan's turn to confirm, but Grandma Martha, out of habit, had checked too. She said the eyes weren't open, but she had clearly seen the distinct bulge of the eyeballs beneath the eyelids. The baby's mother went into a frantic, almost hysterical state. But years later, when Grandma Martha saw her, she was lovingly raising the child. Grandma Martha confided in my mother that she had kept this secret for a long time. What if I was mistaken, she'd wondered. But even now, she told my mother, I can't help but suspect that Susan intentionally damaged that baby's eyes. Grandma Martha said that the vague sense of unease she felt when she woke up to the expectant mother's cries, looking back on it calmly, was this. Why didn't Susan say a word to wake me up? She wondered if Susan harbored some grudge against that expectant mother, or was it just Grandma Martha's imagination, and the child truly was born with a disability? Now, she said, there's no way to know. Chapter 12. The Unborn Spirit and the Family. Last spring, my brother David brought home a woman he wanted to marry, and our family was completely taken aback. She was divorced, had a 4-year-old daughter, and was 12 years older than him. Both our parents and grandparents initially opposed the idea. However, on the understanding that the couple truly loved each other, discussions eventually progressed smoothly, and they gave their blessing to the marriage. My sister-in-law Sarah's ex-husband was a truly awful man, a gambler, a hacker, and violent. He would reportedly abuse Sarah in front of their child and sometimes even hit the child herself. As a result, the little girl developed a deep fear of adult men. Given that Sarah had a child, she initially suggested they skip a honeymoon. But my parents insisted. "You've been through so much already. We'll look after the child here at home, so you two go on a trip and refresh yourselves." Encouraged by this, my brother and Sarah left for a 10-day trip to Europe. At our family home, there were 5 adults, my parents, my grandparents, and me, when little Mia came to stay. Mia was initially timid, surrounded by unfamiliar adults, but she was family. We've journeyed through tales where the past refuses to stay buried, and where the unseen often casts the longest shadows. From phantom elevators to whispered curses, these stories remind us that reality is far more porous than we often assume. What strange echoes linger in your own quiet corners? What truths might be hidden just beneath the surface of the everyday? Thank you for listening. Perhaps as you go about your day, you'll glance a little differently at the world around you, wondering what secrets it truly holds.